Welcome to Casual Friday. Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is my weekly Casual Friday podcast. If you would like to jump right to a specific point in the video, you can tap or mouse over the video playback area of your screen, and that will reveal the chapter titles and links to the starting point of each section of the video. In this first episode of the 4th season of Casual Friday, I have a couple of tidbits that showed up in my social media feed. I have some housekeeping FAQs that I want to address regarding my channel. I'm going to talk about my unfinished objects, my UFOs from 2020, and finish it February, which is coming up next month. I want to share with you a new project that I just started the other day, which I have a feeling is going to lead to a new tutorial and knit along later this year. And then finally, I want to answer a question about a mysterious vintage pattern for a chicken that one of you brought to my Ravelry group. So let's get started. This summer, I was reading a lot about slow fashion, and I was hearing that phrase come up a lot in some of the new YouTube channels. Well, they were new to me that I started following for people who do historic costuming here on YouTube. And one of the things that they talk about is how the act of hand sewing, or just even if it's by machine, sewing your own clothes, making your own clothes, slows down that whole process of how you acquire clothes. And it kind of pushes that fast fashion mentality to the side. So this past year in particular, people were not going places, and so there wasn't maybe as much of a need for fast fashion anyway. And in addition, people were turning to handcrafts, whether they were making their own sourdough bread or they decided to grow a garden or sew their own clothes. Many people turned to knitting either for the first time or they returned to it for the first time in many, many years. To me, knitting is the ultimate in slow fashion because you aren't just making your own clothing, you are making it one stitch at a time. So there was an article this past week in The Guardian, and it was called, "Could the COVID pandemic make fashion more sustainable?" So they were addressing both fast fashion and how people were turning to secondhand clothing or DIY, do-it-yourself clothing, but also how making the whole fashion world and the idea of fast fashion, pushing that to the side a bit, and how different ways that all of these different movements and the effect of the pandemic is causing may have this long-term effect on the sustainability of fashion. So I'm going to leave that link down in the video description. So somebody posted in the Ravelry group this week asking me if I had ever heard of a sweater, and I'm going to mispronounce the name, I'll put it on the screen, the Kornäs sweater, which is a traditional sweater from the west coast of Finland, if I had heard of it or not. And at first I was thinking, I don't think I've heard of it, but it's possible that I had. And so I looked at the link that she sent me, which was to a pattern that you can see on Ravelry, and I'll leave the link down below. And it didn't look like a familiar type of traditional sweater to me, but the more I read about it, the more I thought, I bet I've read about this before. So last year I was trying to learn more about the history of sweaters and really pinpoint when different types of sort of what the genealogy of sweaters were and where traditional sweaters really had their beginnings. And I came across a master's degree thesis, which I'll put the name of it right here and I'll link down below. Basically what she was doing was looking at traditional sweater types from different regions and then describing what their construction methods were like, what types of stitch patterns were used, what types of materials, all that kind of thing. And just kind of laying it out so you could see the relationship between different types of sweaters, that traditional sweater types from the past, mostly from like the 19th into the mid 20th century. And so I looked through that book and through that thesis, and I found the sweater. And it was interesting because from the description and the drawing, there was no photograph of this type of sweater. There was a drawing of it, and then a schematic and a description of the techniques and that sort of thing that were used in it. And that was why it didn't ring any bells exactly with me, although I kind of thought maybe I'd heard of this. That thesis does talk about this type of sweater, and what's interesting about it is that it combines knitting and tapestry crochet. Now, when I read that term tapestry crochet, at first I was thinking Tunisian crochet, but no, it's not the same thing. So tapestry crochet is like intarsia knitting is in terms of it's for color block use. So you're using multiple colors, and you're not stranding it along. You have different sections that are used with different colors. And so parts of the sweater are knit using these crochet techniques, and parts of the sweater are made with knitted fabric. So that is really interesting, and it might be something that those of you who like both knitting and crochet might find interesting. So I want to give you guys some sort of tips for using my YouTube channel, because at this point I have been posting technique videos almost every week for 4 years, and Casual Friday podcasts every week for 3 years. So that's 350, 60 videos, something like that. It's a lot of videos. So I want to give you some tips for how you can find particular videos on my channel. First of all, I have playlists, but I have a lot of playlists, so that can be hard. Sometimes it's very easy to figure out what playlist a particular video would be in if I have even done a video on that topic. Like if you're wondering if I've ever done a video on a certain type of cast on or bind off, there's a playlist on cast ons and bind offs. Or if you wonder if I've done a video on a certain type of short row, I have a playlist on short rows. So, and I have tons of sock videos. Every sock video is in a playlist called socks, but I also have some separate sock playlists, one for just heels, one for just toes. So that can help narrow things down a little bit. So one of the things that happens when I publish a YouTube video is that YouTube generates closed captions for those videos within about 24 hours. So this is automated, it's done by machine, and it can just take about 24 hours before those closed captions appear. So sometimes I'll get questions about, well, usually I use the closed captions, I'm hard of hearing, but this video doesn't have them. And it's because it's only been up for a half an hour, and they just haven't generated them yet. And then sometimes I will get comments in another language. And when I translate those using Google Translate, inevitably it's, oh, I wish that this was in, whatever language. And the thing is that those closed captions that are automatically generated do two things for you. One is it gives you the closed captions in English, but they also have an auto translate function. So when you tap or mouse over the video playback area to reveal the chapter titles at the bottom of the screen, there's also a little icon that looks like a gear, and that's for your settings. So that allows you to choose what language you want to see those closed captions in. And then next to that, and it might be different if you speak another language, but in the American or English language version of YouTube, right next to that gear is a CC for closed captions. So that's where you turn the captions on and off, but it's the gear that allows you to choose what language you see those closed captions in. Now, because those closed captions exist, that means that you can search my YouTube channel to find a topic that you know that I've talked about. For example, a few months ago, I was telling you in one of the tidbits about these Spanish tomb cushions that were found that date back like 1,000 years, something like that. There's one of the oldest examples of knitting that is still preserved, because one of the problems with textiles is that they decompose over time, and these have been miraculously preserved. And I had talked about that, but it wasn't in the title of the video at all. And this person posted in the Ravelry group, how do I find this? And the answer is, on YouTube, if you are using YouTube from a browser like Chrome or Safari, if you're on a computer, and possibly if you're on a TV, if you're looking at YouTube from a browser and you are on my channel, there is a search box that you can type in phrases within that search box on my channel, and it will give you a list of videos that contain those words. Now, if you are watching YouTube through the YouTube app, if you're on a mobile device like an iPad or a phone or something like that, and you're using the YouTube app to watch the videos, you're not going to find that search box on there. You have to go to either Chrome or Safari, something like that. You have to go to a browser and then go to the YouTube website and my channel. And if you're looking at it that way, then you get that search box. But that can be a really helpful way of looking for things on my channel, because everything that I say has been closed captioned, and that text is then therefore part of the search results on my channel. Another question I've gotten recently has been about notifications. So when you subscribe to a YouTube channel, any YouTube channel, there's a little bell that allows you to say you want notifications. People who have chosen those notifications used to get an email every time I uploaded a video. Those emails stopped in August, and that's because YouTube said people were complaining that their inboxes were filling up with these notifications from YouTube, and they could tell that people weren't really opening the emails, like a very small percentage of people were ever even opening them. So they just decided to eliminate emails. The problem is, this could have been solved in a different way. One, people can unsubscribe from notifications if they don't like them. But secondly, when you receive an email and you see what the topic subject is, and you see somebody's uploaded a video, you don't have to open the email to read it. You've gotten the notification in that way. And you get the notification whenever you decide to open up your email account. So they're not doing that anymore. Instead, the way the notifications come through is if you are in the YouTube app, or if you are using a computer browser, if you specifically Chrome, then you will see the little notification come across that there's a new video. That's the way the notifications work now, but there's still another way, which is the way I use to be notified whether or not a channel has a new video. And that is, I go to my subscription feed on YouTube. My bookmark for YouTube is not the YouTube homepage. My bookmark is my subscription feed. And it will show you in reverse chronological order all of the videos that have been uploaded to all of the channels that you subscribe to. So you see, first thing you see is what's been uploaded today. Then you see what was uploaded yesterday, and then the day before, et cetera, et cetera. And you can also look at any specific channel that you subscribe to and see what has been uploaded recently. So I upload videos on Tuesday and Friday, usually sometime between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. Central Time in the US. Usually between there, it depends on when I'm done editing. So if you're wondering if I've uploaded a video yet, go to your subscription feed and you can see if it's there yet. Otherwise, later in the evening for sure, it'll be there. Because somebody was saying, well, what's the point of even subscribing if you can't get notifications? And the point of subscribing is that you can be notified. It's just that you need to go look at your subscription feed. And if you don't subscribe, then you have to actually just go to the channel every time manually in order to figure out if I've uploaded a video. So I am the kind of knitter who is perfectly happy with multiple works in progress and having piles of UFOs, unfinished objects, lying around. For years, they just gradually collected and they collected and collected. And because I am a very much an out of sight, out of mind person, if they were stuffed in a bag or a box or a bin somewhere and I couldn't see it, it was like it didn't even exist. I was sort of aware that there were projects out there, but I had no clue how many of them there were. But I'm also the kind of knitter who, when I become aware of how much of something that I have that I'm not using, when I become aware of that quantity, it makes me feel uneasy. On Ravelry, every person has a notebook that you can use or not use. And for me, it was always a wonderful way for keeping track of my projects. And it was on Ravelry that I would start noticing, look at how many things I have that aren't finished, and it would be like 14, 15 or something, and I would start to feel really uneasy about that. And yet I still wanted to start something new. I love starting new projects. It's my favorite thing. And so I would make a deal with myself. I would say, okay, I can start this new thing after I finish 2 other things. And whatever the new thing is, it has to be something that I can finish in a couple of days so that I'm not adding to my UFO pile. And then I'll finish 2 more things. And then it would get to be a point, I wouldn't have to finish everything. I would just have to get the pile, the visual pile that I had on my Ravelry notebook screen, just get that manageable. And once it got down below a certain point, then I felt much better about just starting any new project I wanted. So a few years ago, I did an office overhaul. I was reorganizing my office, and I did the Marie Kondo thing where I took all of my patterns out, and then I took all of my books out, and then my tools, whatever. I sorted through everything, reorganized them, got all my yarn, decided what yarn I was never going to use, and donated it. And then I got all my projects out, and there were projects I completely forgot about. I was like, I didn't even recognize them, and I had like 40 some projects. Now I'm a person who, when I had like 12 to 14 projects, would get uneasy. And so when I saw that I had 40, 45 projects, I felt sick. But then I realized that there were some years when I knit 40 or 50 projects in a year. And so that was how many projects there were, and they were all started. And so I spent the year finishing as many projects as I could. Now, I wasn't mean to myself. I still let myself start new projects if it was a gift and it was something that had a deadline, so I wasn't, again, adding to my UFO pile. So during the course of that year, I finished about 32 or 3 of those projects. There were a few that I threw away, one I gave away, and then there was a handful that I was kind of ambivalent about, and I wasn't really sure if I ever wanted to finish them, but I didn't really want to toss them and I didn't want to rip them out. So I just kept them for the next year. So during all of that year, somebody mentioned to me that, oh, they do finish at February every year. Just every year in February, they just work through their UFO pile, and then at the end of February, they carry on with any new thing that they want. But that's just something that they did every February, just kind of clean things up a little bit. And I thought that is a genius idea. So I started doing Finish It February, not the year after this big UFO clean out, because there was virtually nothing left, but the year following that. So every February since then, I pull out all of my UFOs and I look at them and I make a decision about whether or not I ever want to finish it, if I maybe want to finish it someday. And so I just go through and I make a decision about, is this a project that I will want to finish someday, and just kind of sort things out that way. And then I spend February working through those things. So when I had a huge number of projects, I kind of wanted to organize them in a way that was by category. Like I had 17 single socks, so 17 pairs of socks to finish. I had a couple of blankets. I had a couple of things that just needed some ends woven in. So I kind of categorized everything, and I figured out how many things I had. And the first thing I did was to finish as many of the things that were essentially done, but just needed like ends woven in or needed something very small done, so that I could cross those things off my list and I felt like I was making progress. And then from there on, some of the projects I would divide into sub-projects. If there was a partial sweater, I would say a sleeve is a sub-project. A blanket square is another sub-project. So I wouldn't make myself finish any given project completely before I move to the next one. I would just decide, what is it in this project that I want to finish before I move on to the next thing that I want to work on. So that is one way of doing a Finish It February. Another way of working through unfinished projects that someone told me about last year was that you have say 5 UFOs. You're just going to work on 5 of your projects, and you're going to work on a project for, say, 10 hours of knitting time. And when you get to the end of that 10 hours, that one goes to the bottom of the pile, and then you get to work on the next one, so that you're not ever feeling like you're in a complete slog and a never-ending hallway of knitting on a particular project. And in that pile of 5, once you have completed one of them, and now you only have 4, you can take something else from your UFO pile and add it to that. Or that might be a situation in which you allow yourself to start something new. When I've completed one of these things, then I can start something new, and then it goes into the rotation of every 10 hours or 5 hours or 20, whatever it is that works for you. So the point is that there are options and there are ideas, and you pick out what it is that works for you. So for me, because I've been doing Finish It February regularly the past few years, and because I regularly do a podcast showing my progress on my projects, I tend to keep up better with my UFOs than I ever did in the past. So for me, I have 2 sweaters that are not finished. I ended 2020 with 2 sweaters that were not finished. One is missing one sleeve and the other is missing both sleeves. So I might work on one or the other of those this month. I haven't decided yet, but for sure, I will be working on those sweaters in February. So, and then once February is over, if I'm really sick of working on them and I want to do something else, I will do something else, because it's my knitting. It's just a way to kind of manage yourself, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed and you have some guilt or whatever about the number of things that you have lying around that you haven't finished. So I started a project the other day on Wednesday. It's this sock right here. Now there's nothing particularly surprising about the fact that I have knit a sock, but if you have been a viewer for a while, you may be surprised that I knit this toe up, because I have had a long-standing aversion to toe up sock knitting. I try not to have a prejudice about something without doing it first. So I've knit hundreds of cuff down socks, but I've only ever knit 2 socks toe up, and they were not 2 of the same pair. I was 2 single socks. I didn't enjoy the process, and so I didn't see any reason, there was no compelling reason for me to knit socks toe up, and so I haven't. But I do get asked a lot for advice on toe up sock knitting that I can't really give because I don't have any specific experience a lot of times with tips and tricks that are helpful for toe up socks versus cuff down, because there are some differences in processes and in terms of the types of techniques that are used in the same parts of a sock. So some parts of a sock are knit exactly the same, like the ribbing and the straight leg of a sock are knit exactly the same. It's just a tube. What's different about cuff down versus toe up is how that edge is formed. So you need a cast on edge for one that's very stretchy and will stretch as much as the fabric can stretch, like to its maximum ability. But for toe up, you need a cast off method, a bind off method that can stretch as much as the fabric. So you need techniques that do the same thing, but they are very different techniques. And in some cases, like a sock heel can be knit exactly the same in both directions. But if I don't like knitting that particular sock heel cuff down, I'm not going to enjoy it anymore knitting it toe up. So, you know, there was never really a good reason for me to knit toe up. A lot of people have a preference for toe up, usually for a specific reason, like they want to use all of their yarn, or they don't like grafting, or, you know, whatever reason it is, they really enjoy a particular heel construction that is done toe up. So, and that's fair, because I have the same feelings about sock construction cuff down. But I have been trying to find reasons to want to knit toe up, or just not mind it, like just doing it sometimes just for the heck of it, rather than having to have a compelling reason. But there has always been reasons why I didn't want to knit toe up, and so I didn't. But this week, I realized that in the past year, the heel method that I've been using for all the socks I've been knitting does work in both directions. I know how to modify it to fit any kind of heel and foot situation, and it will work equally well toe up as it will cuff down. So I've gotten over that hurdle. One of the issues that I wasn't crazy about was the bind off methods that are available for toe up knitting. You have to either have a sewn bind off of some sort, or you need a bind off that adds additional yarn during the bind off process. And I've tried a bunch of different ones and I just didn't like them. There are some sewn bind offs that I really like the appearance of, but are really fiddly. So this past week when I was knitting a bunch of different fingerless mitts for my Technique Tuesday video, I was playing around with, for each mitt, just to keep myself entertained, I was choosing cast on and bind off methods that matched each other. So for the Knit One Purl One ribbing of one mitt, I did a alternating cast on, which gives the same sort of result as a tubular cast on without having to do the setup rows. And then there's a grafted bind off that matches it. I did a video on that a couple of weeks ago on doing that in the round and how to get a nice finish for that without a jog in the bind off edge. For one of them, I decided to do a long tail cast on. Now there is a matching bind off for long tail cast on called the outline stitch bind off, and I have done a video on that in the past. And I like the look of it. It's very stretchy, but it's a technique that I found in an Elizabeth Zimmerman book years ago. And I like the result, but I find the process to be tedious and frustrating and easy to make mistakes. And so I don't use it very often. It was another argument against toe up sock knitting. But as I was doing all of these fingerless mitts, I thought, there's three kinds of sewn bind offs that I know of, and I haven't ever looked to see if there's another one. I haven't heard of another one, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I took out my reference books. I took out Principles of Knitting, and I took out Knitter's Handbook. Those are the two that tend to have the most techniques of any particular kind in them. And I saw that in Principles of Knitting, she had the three bind offs that I already knew, but she did the outline stitch bind off a different way using a technique that was like dramatically easier. It was so easy, I had to keep checking the directions to make sure that I was doing it correctly and really examining the results. Like, why is this so easy? And why did Elizabeth Zimmerman make it so hard? So I've resolved the edge at the cuff. I have an edge that looks exactly the same and functions exactly the same, whether I'm working cuff down or toe up. And I have a heel that's worked exactly the same regardless of which way I'm working. The last remaining obstacle was the toe. I don't love the process of working from a closed cast on and then increasing to create the sock toe. I'll do it. I don't love it. So I was thinking I was going to have to do that and trying to figure out which type of sock toe I wanted to reverse. And I remembered a toe that my friend Joan Schroeder has mentioned in the Ravelry forums a number of times and has always intrigued me. And it's a type of toe that doesn't require any increases. And I've been fascinated by it and I've wanted to try it, but I've never wanted to knit a toe up sock before. So I've never gone farther than just swatching a little bit to see how it works and not being convinced of what the fit was going to be like on my particular foot. So I thought, well, I'm going to try Joan's toe, and then the rest of this whole sock is going to be knit exactly like I would knit it if it was cuffed down. And I have this great new bind off technique that I'm happy to use. So that's all good. So that's how I ended up with this particular sock, and I'm definitely going to knit the second one. The other thing that I did to make sure that I could get this sock done was I used a 6-ply sock yarn instead of a 4-ply, so fewer stitches, fewer rounds. It went really quickly. I will probably be doing some technique videos on both the toe and then this bind off method because it's such a superior process to the one that I have always known before. So for the first time, I'm excited about knitting a toe-up sock, and I'll see when I'm done with this if I can then muster up more excitement for the toe-up processes of other types of heels, because that has been a sticking point for me in the past, and maybe I can just overcome that and continue on, because I have had a lot of requests for tutorials and videos on toe-up sock techniques that I just have never done because it was not something I personally enjoyed doing. It's a new year and I'm up for new explorations. Oftentimes knitters will post questions on Ravelry and they'll say, I am reading through my pattern and it says to do this and I do not understand what they mean. So the first question that we ask is, did you try following the instructions? And if you did, where did you get stuck? Because sometimes they'll post like this long list of instructions and you're like, where are you getting stuck? You can't be getting stuck on the cast on 30 stitches. So where is it that you're getting stuck? And are you at that point in your knitting? Like, do you have the yarn and needles in your hand and you don't know what to do? Or are you just unable to visualize what's going to happen? So it's always helpful, first of all, if you can't visualize something, to get out some yarn and needles and try it, because often what you can't visualize is something that is very obvious when you have something to look at in your hands. So that's number one. But this was an interesting question that came up today in the Ravelry group. There was a woman who said that she had recently at an antique store bought a big pile of vintage knitting booklets from the 60s and 70s. And she didn't have any intention of knitting it. It just reminded her of the things that her grandmother had made for her when she was young. And so she just had that kind of attachment to those patterns in that way. But she was sorting through them and this little piece of paper fell out. And there was a knitting pattern. Was just typed up. There's no picture, no drawing. It just was a set of instructions. And she's like, I can visualize what they're saying to do, but I don't understand what's going on. So I read through the instructions and I could visualize and understand what each step was. And I kind of had a vague picture in my head of what this shape would be, but I wasn't sure. And so for me anyway, there's a difference between being able to visualize specific sets of instruction and really visualizing what the end result is in terms of proportions and all of that. So I want to go through this process because the pattern was it just said, it was titled Chicken. And there was this list of instructions and there was no information about what to do once you were done knitting. So I want to go through that process and show you how I went about it in order to gradually figure out what this likely was going to be. So with number 5 needles, that's probably like 5.5 stitches per inch. So if you look at 32 stitches, that's going to be something that's about 6 inches wide. So we can draw something that's 6 inches, that represents 6 inches wide. And it says to do that for a 1/2 inch ribbing. So we know that this is a 1/2 inch and we can draw little lines to indicate that that is ribbing. Then the next thing is knit both sides for 6 ridges. So ridges is referring to garter stitch. So when you work 2 rows of garter stitch, you get what's called a ridge. And the way that garter stitch works is that however many stitches per inch you're getting in garter stitch, that's how many ridges per inch you'll get. So it's 12 rows, but it's 6 ridges, and that will be about 1 inch. So since it looks like we're working with something in the DK weight gauge range, I'm going to guess that this is supposed to be about 1 inch. So I'm going to draw something a little longer than what I did before with the 1/2 inch. And then this is garter stitch. So we've got 6 ridges of garter stitch here. So we've got 6 ridges of garter stitch, and that's going to be about 1 inch in length is what I'm guessing. So then the next thing we have is to cast off 10 stitches. That is about 1/3 of these right here. So you're going to come across this row and you're going to cast off, and then you're going to work to the end of the row, and then you're going to cast off 10 stitches here. So this will be a little bit higher, but it's still going to be about the middle. And then it says knit on 12 stitches for 3/4 of an inch. It doesn't say if you're supposed to still just be doing garter stitch, but it doesn't say to work in stockinette. So I went back and forth on this, and I decided it's probably garter stitch. They just don't care how many ridges. For some reason they cared about the ridges here. So we're going to do a few ridges less than this. So if this was about 1 inch, it's probably about 4 ridges around there. So that's 3/4 of an inch. And again, that's in garter stitch. And then you're supposed to cast off. So this is a weird looking thing. It doesn't say what to do with it, but all we know is that it's supposed to be a chicken at the end. So I'm guessing this is supposed to be sewn around the edges in some way to form something that looks like a chicken, in very much the way that the Waldorf school has its students who are learning to knit make a little rectangle of garter stitch, and then it gets folded and sewn somehow into a bunny shape. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, well, this could maybe be the beak or something, or the head, or that something's going on. And then there's a reason why there's ribbing down here. So there somehow some of these edges for sure are going to be sewn up, but I question whether that one is supposed to be sewn. There's some reason for this ribbing down here. So I did a quick Google and I looked for knitted chicken to see what would show up. And I found something that was very much shaped like this without the ribbing, was all garter stitch. And I looked at how those were sewn up and what they were used for. So I knitted up my own little sample right here. And instead of binding off, I left these stitches live on the needles. You could bind off and then sew this, but based on what I saw when I did a Google search, I realized that this is going to have to be closed at the top. So I'm going to transfer these to a sewing needle, yarn needle. But first I want to talk a little bit about, like, how could this possibly be folded up and formed into a chicken? Well, would it be around this way and sewn up something like that? This to me is a clue that this is supposed to be an opening. And so if I look at it like this, I can see that I have sort of an animal shape. I don't know that it looks that much like a chicken, but if I were to sew up the sides here, I would get some sort of an animal shape. And then again, what is this opening for? So I've decided that this is the head. That's why I thought it'd be good to just pull those stitches closed. And I'm going to go around one more time to really cinch those stitches closed. So I've closed that up, and now the next thing I need to do is sew this edge along. I have to decide how I'm going to sew that. And I might just do like a whip stitch along the edge there. I have a chain edge on this side, and then I have a chain on this side. So I've joined the top, and now I need to join the bottoms here, and I'm going to use a garter bump from each edge as I go. Okay, so what I have here is a little thing. Now, I could do something like run a strand of yarn around here to cinch this up a little bit so it's more like a head. I could stuff it, I could put a beak on it or something. But what is the point of this? It could be for a little Easter egg thing like that. So that's my thought on what the chicken is. This is what I do in general with vintage patterns. Even if it's for a garment, they often did not have schematics. And so I follow the directions and I just draw the shapes as they're going. If there's bind offs or decreases or increases, I see how long they're going and then how many rows. And I just gradually figure out how is that shape what shape is being created, what's going on here. Just seeing the schematic also wasn't quite enough for me. I actually needed to knit the item and then try to figure out how to fold this all together in order to make a shape that made sense. And I couldn't have done that in my head. I understood all the instructions and knew what ribbing would look like, knew what garter stitch would look like, all of that, but I didn't know exactly what the proportions were going to be, and I couldn't figure out how I'm going to fold this all together and sew it up until I actually had it physically in my hand. So my recommendation is that if you are reading ahead in a pattern and you read an instruction that you just can't visualize, what you need to do is have some yarn and needles in your hand and then follow the instructions. So sometimes you just need to follow the instructions and then you will understand it. In this particular case, this was a case where the individual instructions I personally could visualize, but even though I had a general idea of what the shape was, I couldn't manipulate that in my head in order to figure out what this thing might end up being. So it really took knitting up this. It was a very small swatch, didn't take me very long. And I could get a sense of what it might be. I had an idea that it might be something similar to a Waldorf bunny. And so then I had good luck Googling for that. Once I sort of had in my head, oh, I wonder if this is what I'm looking for. And then I was able to do that. And then sometimes if I can get the scale actually right, my schematic was not to the right scale. The width was far too narrow for what I was drawing for the height. But if you can get the scale absolutely correct, I do sometimes cut out Kleenex if it's a small item and then try to see if I can figure out how things are supposed to fold together or go together, because sometimes it's really hard. If you've never seen this thing before, it's hard to visualize what it is the written instructions are telling you to do. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.